Sometimes we look at a nation and only see what we're told. The noise, the headlines, the dust of poverty, the glitter of Bollywood. But beneath the surface, sometimes far beneath it, there's a truth so ancient, so rich, so forgotten, that when it rises again, it shakes the world awake. And today, I want to talk about that truth. India, a land often viewed through a fractured lens. But now, after 24 long years of silence, stillness, and political hesitation, the ancient minds are opening once again, and the world is about to see a face of India. It had forgotten the Golden Empire. There's something incredibly powerful about the return of something long forgotten. Not lost? No, not that, because India never truly lost her gold. She buried it. She let the earth carry her memory, her pride, her wealth, for reasons far deeper than politics. But now the soil is being disturbed again, not by invaders or colonizers this time, but by her own people. People who remember what that ground once meant. The Collar goldfields, silent and sealed for nearly a quarter of a century, are stirring. And in that awakening, something sacred, something political, something profoundly emotional is happening, not just for India, but for the world watching her rise. Let's not pretend this is just about gold. It never is. It never has been. This is about a reclamation of resources, yes, but also of a narrative. For 24 years, these mines sat quiet, machinery rusted, jobs vanished. Generations grew up without ever hearing the hum of work that once defined these lands. But beneath the silence was always a hum of history, a pulse that said, "We are not finished yet." And now the pulse has become a beat, and that beat is becoming a roar. A nation that once stood looted and broken is returning to the soil, digging deep, not just into the earth, but into its forgotten power. When the British Empire ruled over India, the gold from these mines flowed not into the hands of those who toiled for it, but into palaces across the sea. The wealth was not shared, it was stripped. The pride was not nurtured, it was humiliated. Yet even then, India endured quietly, painfully. And now, decades later, to see these mines reopen, not under the Union Jack, not by multinational corporations with imperial strings attached, but by Indians, for Indians. That's not just poetic, that's power reclaiming itself. There's an image I want you to hold in your heart. A miner, covered in dust, standing at the mouth of a reopened shaft, eyes lifted toward the rising sun. That image says more than any economist could, because this isn't just about what's under the ground, it's about what rises from within. It's about dignity, restored, employment, returned, dreams rekindled. That image, that man, represents a country not content to be told who it is or what it's worth. That's India saying, we remember our greatness and we're not afraid to dig for it. And let's talk about that digging, because it's not easy, it's not glamorous, it's heavy, it's sweaty, it's full of risk and resistance. Reopening a mine isn't just flipping a switch, it's confronting the ghosts of history. The corruption that halted progress, the safety concerns, the funding struggles, the bureaucratic nightmare. But India is saying it's worth it. The wounds are worth reopening if it means they can finally heal with honor. That courage to face the past, to wrestle with it, to transform pain into promise, that's leadership. That's national character. And so this mine, this one place, this single spark is actually something bigger. It's a symbol of a national turning point. A message to the world, don't look at us through yesterday's lens. Because what happens when you awaken something ancient and glorious that has been sleeping for too long? The world blinks in surprise. The markets whisper. The old powers shift uneasily. But India walks forward, eyes clear, purpose strong. We live in a time when resources are fought over, hoarded, politicized. But here is India, not taking from others, but digging from within. Not exploiting, but reviving. And that matters. It matters politically, it matters spiritually, and it matters globally. Because when a country can nourish itself from its own ground, on its own terms, with its own people in charge, that's freedom. That's what sovereignty looks like in the modern world. So yes, the color gold fields are reopening. But what's really happening here is the rebirth of a narrative long buried under colonial dust and modern cynicism. It's a story that says we're not relics, we're not just tradition, we're tomorrow, and we are writing our future in the veins of our own earth. I want you to remember this moment, not because gold is shiny or headlines are loud, but because this is the moment when dignity returned to the soil, when a country looked inward and found treasure not just in the ground, but in its resilience. And I believe with everything in me that this is just the beginning. Gold, it glistens, yes. It dazzles. But more than that, it defines. It builds empires, triggers wars, balances economies, and saves collapsing currency. So when a nation like India, with her billion hearts and ancient soul, begins to touch that gold again, not in ornaments or offerings, but as a strategic asset, the whole world pays attention. Because this time, the gold is not just wealth, it's power. And not the kind of power that shouts. It's the kind that stands tall in silence and makes the room shift. India's decision to reopen its dormant gold mines isn't only an economic revival, it's a political recalibration. We live in a world where money speaks every language, and gold, more than any currency, holds universal fluency. When nations gather at global summits, when policies are decided behind closed doors, when trade deals are negotiated in distant corridors, gold is always at the table. And for decades, India sat there as one of the largest consumers of gold, but not as a dominant producer. That imbalance is changing now. Imagine this, a country that imports hundreds of tons of gold annually, spending billions of dollars year after year, draining foreign reserves. Now imagine that same country digging from her own earth, reclaiming that cost, reducing her dependence on external powers, and slowly converting that gold into geopolitical leverage. That's not just a financial shift. That's a paradigm shift. It's a move that says we will no longer rent our value, we will mine it ourselves, because gold is more than just metal. It's monetary security. In times of global financial instability, when currencies tremble and economies wobble, countries turn to gold. It's the oldest insurance policy the world has ever known. And the more gold India produces, the stronger her economic backbone becomes. It means less pressure on foreign currency reserves. It means a stronger rupee. It means that India doesn't have to bow to inflation, dictated by foreign oil prices or dollar dynamics. That's power, not just in theory, but in every rupee note that carries more meaning. Because it's backed by something real. But let's look deeper the way I always liked. Let's talk about sovereignty. When a nation owns its natural resources and controls their destiny, it doesn't have to beg, it doesn't have to compromise values to secure loans or please foreign investors. It stands with confidence, and confidence, my friends, is the greatest currency of all. Confidence builds roads. It attracts innovation. It strengthens military posture without firing a single shot. Confidence, backed by gold, can lift entire generations out of insecurity and into stability. So when India goes into the mines again, she's not just unearthing gold, she's unearthing autonomy. She's telling the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, we have options. That's not arrogance, it's dignity. It's what happens when you stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward for value. Because there's something deeply profound about a country that mines its own gold, funds its own infrastructure, and builds its own destiny with its own hands. Now think of the timing. This isn't happening in the 1960s or the 1980s. This is happening now, when the global order is shifting, when BRICS is rising, when alternative financial alliances are forming, when the world is quietly but undeniably pivoting away from single-source dominance. In that fragile, pivotal moment, India's decision to bring her gold back into play becomes a geopolitical masterstroke. It means when new trade currencies are discussed, India will have a voice that's not borrowed, but earned, mined, and minted in her own name. But we must also see the emotional weight behind this move. Because for a country like India, gold isn't just economic, it's ancestral. It's in the dowries, in the festivals, in the sacred temple. So for India to now use that very heritage as a strategic tool on the world stage, it's not just smart, it's poetic. It's like saying the soul of our civilization now fuels our future. The personal becomes political, the cultural becomes strategic. And in that transformation lies true brilliance. Of course, this isn't going unnoticed. Financial centers in London, investors in Wall Street, traders in Shanghai, they're all watching. And they should. Because this move changes everything. It's not about hoarding, it's about balance, not about conquest, but reclamation. India isn't trying to dominate the world with her gold. She's simply refusing to be left behind by it anymore. So I ask again, what happens when a nation reaches into her own soil, retrieves what is rightfully hers, and does it not with greed but with wisdom? What happens when she builds not just for today but for generations yet unborn? What happens when she stops asking and starts owning? I'll tell you what happens. The world shifts. Because true power isn't in making others feel small. It's in knowing your worth, finally, and choosing to rise. And gold. Oh, gold knows how to rise. There's a certain kind of silence that lingers in places where injustice once lived. It doesn't scream. It waits. It hums in the soil. And if you listen closely, if you lean in with your whole heart, you can still hear the weight of the past. India knows that silence all too well. For centuries, its gold was not celebrated as a national treasure, but extracted as colonial loot from temples to palaces, from the mines of Kolar to the vaults of London. India's gold didn't stay where it belonged. It was taken, carried across oceans, melted into coins, studded into crowns. It was stripped from the land and from the people and left behind a nation, bleeding but breathing, always breathing. Now, more than 75 years after independence, India is digging once again, but this time it's not a foreign hand holding the pickaxe. It's her own. And in that act, in that single sovereign movement, something sacred is happening. India is breaking the cycle. The long-standing pattern of exploitation is being shattered. Not with anger, but with intention. Not with revenge, but with reclamation. Because the story isn't just about reopening gold mines. It's about healing wounds that were never meant to heal quietly. Let's not forget the number. During the British Raj, trillions of dollars worth of gold, artifacts, and raw resources were siphoned out of India. Economists have calculated that colonial policies drained nearly $45 trillion from the Indian economy. But that's just numbers. The real loss was something deeper. It was the loss of agency, of choice, of control over one's own wealth. That kind of loss doesn't just show up on ledgers, it shows up in generations of children who never saw what their land was truly worth. So when India reopens a mine, she's not just opening a shaft in the ground, she's opening a new chapter. She's saying we are not defined by what was taken. We are defined by what we choose to take back. And that is where the shift begins. Not in revenge, not in asking for what was lost, but in building something even greater from what still remains. I think about those miners, their families, their children. For decades, they lived with the ghosts of gold, the memory of wealth that once sustained their towns, but left without a trace. Now they stand at the edge of history, ready to work again, but this time with dignity. Because now the gold they find isn't going to fund someone else's empire. It's going to fund their own futures. It's going to pave roads, build hospitals, send daughters to college. It's going to bring pride back to regions that were once rich in purpose, but poor in opportunity. And let's speak honestly, this isn't easy. The colonial mindset didn't just vanish when the British left. It lingered in systems, in policies, in the idea that India must always be the consumer, never the producer, that her resources were best used when exported, that her place in the global order was submissive, not strategic. But that mindset, it's crumbling, slowly, steadily, and the reopening of the gold mines is another hammer striking at its foundation. Because there's something deeply political in saying we will not let the story end the way it was written for us. India is rewriting the narrative of exploitation, not by erasing history, but by confronting it, by taking what was once used to weaken her and turning it into a source of strength, by transforming the very symbol of plunder into a symbol of progress. That's not just leadership, that's transformation. And transformation, real transformation, begins from within. You see, this is about more than just India. It's about every nation, every people who were told they were too late, too broken, too dependent to rise again. India's gold is a mirror held up to the world, saying we remember everything, and still we choose to rise. And maybe that's what makes this moment so powerful. It isn't loud, it isn't brash, it's quiet, grounded, a steady hand, reaching into the earth, not to steal, not to hoard, but to restore balance. And in that balance, something truly rare is found. Justice. Not the courtroom kind, but the soulful kind. The kind that looks generations of suffering in the eye and says no more. So yes, India is breaking the colonial cycle, but not by marching in protest or begging for apologies. By digging, by working, by standing in her own land, with her own hands, and claiming her own treasure. And as that gold rises from the soil once again, so does the spirit of a nation that has waited long enough to say, this is ours, and we're not giving it away again. When people talk about national wealth, they often think of skyscrapers, stock markets, and GDP charts. But real wealth, true soul-rooted wealth, is measured in people, in the hands that build, the feet that walk miles for opportunity, the hearts that keep hoping even when all the lights go out. And for millions across rural India, the reopening of the country's gold mines isn't just a headline or a policy decision. It is something far more personal. It is the return of life itself to places that were once forgotten. Let's talk about the people, not the politicians, not the bankers, but the workers, the families, the children in school uniforms too big for their small frames, because they're meant to last 5 years, The widows still holding photographs of fathers who once worked in the coal mine, the mothers who told stories of golden dust while cooking over wood stoves, hoping that maybe, just maybe, one day those mines would sing again. And now, after 24 long years, they are. But this isn't about nostalgia. This is about resurrection. In towns surrounding these mines, life had all but vanished. When the shafts were sealed, livelihoods collapsed. Local businesses died. Youth migrated. And what remained were empty homes, rusting machines, and the silence of a future that never came. People waited and waited, and then stopped waiting because hope had worn too thin. But now those towns are seeing light again, not just from the sun, but from possibility. When a mine reopens, it's not just gold that comes out of the ground, it's purpose. Jobs return, not just for the miners, but for truck drivers, tea stall owners, cloth sellers, school teachers, nurses. A mine is a beating heart, and everything around it is a vein. That heartbeat brings life to thousands, not just economically, but emotionally. It says you matter again. You are not invisible. And let me tell you something. There is no policy more powerful than belonging, no reform greater than recognition. These communities are not just being hired, they're being seen. After years of political neglect, of being used for votes and forgotten after elections, they are now part of something that runs deeper than any manifesto. They are digging into the same earth their ancestors walked, and pulling from it the dignity they were once denied. This is why this moment is political, not because it's a debate in parliament or a point on a party's agenda, but because it is a return of power to the people. Rural India has often been reduced to numbers, poverty levels, illiteracy rates, agricultural losses, but they are not numbers, they are narratives. And this gold revival is rewriting those narratives in real time. It is saying you are not just the backbone of this nation, you are the beating heart of. Imagine what happens when a father who once walked 10 miles for labor now walks proudly into a mine with a helmet on his head and a secure wage in his pocket. Imagine a mother who no longer has to borrow money to buy school books for her daughter. Imagine a child who dreams not of escaping the village, but of building it. This is the quiet revolution happening beneath the ground, the kind that doesn't make loud headlines, but changes lives forever. And yet the impact is not confined to one district or one mine. This is a blueprint. What's happening in Colonization or any of the other potential gold sites, this is replicable. If done right, safely, sustainably, and ethically, it can spark a rural renaissance. It can show the world that India's growth story is not just urban or digital. It is deep, grounded. Let's also acknowledge the generational impact, because this isn't just about jobs. It's about legacy. Children who grow up watching their parents work with pride, earn with dignity, invest with security. They grow up differently. They dream differently. They speak differently. And those dreams don't migrate to other countries. They bloom right where they're planted. That's nation building. That's transformation. At the soul level, of course, there will be challenges. Mining is a complex endeavor, filled with environmental, ethical, and safety concerns. But if handled with accountability and transparency, this can become a model not just for India, but for any nation looking to reconnect with its roots while building a sustainable future. So let's not look at this as just a gold rush. This is a people's movement,
wrapped in silence, coated in dust, but shimmering with hope. Because at the end of the day, a mine is just a hole in the ground, unless it lifts the people above it. And what India is doing now, what her rural citizens are doing now, is lift not just gold, but one another. The world has a way of pretending it's not watching, until something shifts, until something real starts to rise, until a sleeping giant stretches, shakes off the dust, and says, now it's our time. That's what's happening right now with India's gold revival. And don't be fooled by how quietly it's happening, because what India is doing is sending shockwaves across the globe, the kind that aren't broadcast with blaring sirens, but felt deep in the boardrooms of billionaires, at energy summits, and in whispered conversations between anxious economists, the kind of shift that doesn't ask for permission. It reclaims power. India reopening its gold mines after 24 years isn't just a story of economy or geology. It's a strategic recalibration of global influence. Because let me tell you this, when a country like India starts to extract its own wealth rather than import it, borrow it, or let it be dictated by external interests, the global financial architecture gets nervous. Why? Because for too long, too many powers benefited from India being the buyer, the dependent, the obedient piece on their geopolitical chessboard. But now, the board is turning. Think about what it really means. India, the world's largest democracy, a rising technological, a military force, a cornerstone of the BRICS alliance, is no longer satisfied being a consumer of power. She is positioning herself as a producer of influence. She's not waiting for the West to approve. She's digging into her own soil, her own history, her own sovereign worth, and turning that into leverage. That changes the entire game. You see, gold isn't just a metal, it's a symbol, a currency of trust. When global markets collapse, when paper money loses its value, when crises, nations turn to gold, always have, always will. So when India starts to increase her own production of it, she's not just boosting her reserves, she's strengthening her seat at the table. She's walking into every international negotiation, from defense to trade to climate, and saying, we don't need to borrow your strength, we've got our own. Now imagine the ripple effects. The International Monetary Fund, watching closely. The United States Federal Reserve, taking note. China, calculating its next move. Because gold is power insurance, it reduces dependence on the dollar. It gives you room to breathe, to stand your ground, to shape your future without compromising your values. That's exactly what India is doing. And the world isn't just watching, it's repositioning itself. Let's be honest, for too long, the global financial system has operated on a belief, unspoken but deeply held, that some nations are meant to rise, while others are meant to. That belief kept certain countries rich, and others permanently developing. But now India is saying, we are not here to serve, we are here to shape. And that is terrifying to those who relied on India's dependency for their dominance. This gold revival also comes at a time when the world is hungry for alternatives. The global south is rising, new alliances are forming. BRICS is no longer a symbolic acronym, it's becoming a platform of economic resistance to Western monopoly. And India, with its population, its brain power, and now its homegrown wealth, is becoming a pillar of that resistance, not with weapons, not with wars, but with economic self-reliance. There's also something beautifully poetic in how India is doing this, not by stealing, not by colonizing, not by stepping on others, but by simply looking inward and saying, what if everything we need has been here all along? That is the most revolutionary act of all, choosing not to dominate others, but to reclaim yourself. And this is the part the West doesn't always understand. For India, gold isn't just an asset, it's an identity. It's woven into her rituals, her weddings, her gods, her soil. So when she revives her mines, she's not just boosting numbers, she's aligning her economy with her soul. That kind of power is harder to measure, but it's also harder to resist. Some will say this move is too small to matter, But let me remind you, empires don't crumble in explosions, they crumble in undercurrents, in shifts of confidence, in quiet revolutions that begin in villages, in policy rooms, in old minds breathing new life. And that's exactly what this is, a quiet revolution, the kind that whispers before it roars. The truth is, India is not asking for the world's permission anymore. She's not begging for inclusion in elite circles. She is building her own circle, one based on sovereignty, dignity, and golden resilience. And as she does, the world must decide, adapt or fall behind. Because once a nation remembers her worth, once she starts pulling power from her own ground, once she stops outsourcing her identity, there's no stopping her. She doesn't need to rise with, she rises with grace, gold and grounded intention. Gold is not just something India wears, it's something she is. It's not merely mined or bought or traded, it is woven into the very essence of her civilization. For thousands of years, India didn't just possess gold, she revered it. She offered it to her gods, gifted it to her daughters, adorned her leaders with it not for vanity, but for symbolism. Because in Indian culture, gold doesn't just represent wealth, it represents blessing, purity, and divine energy. So when the world hears about India reopening her long silent gold mines, many might see economic opportunity. But if you really listen, if you listen with your heart, what's happening is so much more than that. This is a nation reconnecting with her soul. For generations, the temples of India held gold not for profit, but as sacred trust. The ornaments weren't just jewelry, they were prayers cast in metal. The offerings weren't made to impress, they were made to surrender. Gold was the language between the people and the divine. It was present, it was honor, it was sacred space in tangible form. That's what gold meant, and still means to millions of Indians. Now imagine the deeper meaning behind reopening those ancient mines. It's not just machinery turning again, it's spirit rising again. It's as if the land, after decades of silence, is whispering, I still remember who we are, because the truth is, the earth holds memory, and in India that memory is golden. This revival isn't just about reclaiming buried resources, it's about reclaiming buried identity. For too long, India's narrative on the world stage has been shaped by poverty, by post-colonial struggle, by external definitions. But gold, India's gold, is a reminder. She was never poor in soul, never poor in spirit. The temples still glisten, the bangles still shine, the heritage still breathes beneath the dust. And now with the mines reopening, it's as if that ancient light is moving outward again, not as domination, not as pride, but as illumination. We must understand what it means for a country to align its economy with its spiritual roots. This isn't just strategy, it's integration. When India digs gold from her soil today, it's not the same as it was under the British, when it was stripped for greed and exported for power. Today the act is intentional, self-directed, ethical, and rooted in remembrance. The gold being pulled from the earth is coming home, and there's something healing in that. Because when a country has been looted, generation after generation, the wound doesn't just fade with time, it settles in the bones of people who were told their land wasn't valuable, their culture wasn't modern, their traditions weren't efficient. But when those people begin to reclaim the very resource that once made them targets of conquest, something transformative happens. The narrative flips. The pain doesn't vanish, but it becomes power. India is not mining gold just to compete with world markets. She is mining to restore balance, to say to herself and to the world, we were never broken, just buried. And in that resurrection, the entire global south can find a mirror, a reflection of what's possible when pride is pulled from the soil and placed back into the hearts of people. Think of the rituals, the Diwali lights reflected in golden ornaments, the wedding ceremonies where a mother's earrings become a daughter's crown, the sanctums where gold surrounds the deity, not for wealth but for reverence. These aren't just cultural expressions, they are emotional ecosystems. And today, India's economy is beginning to mirror those very roots. That is rare, that is beautiful, that is power with. Let's also talk about leadership, because this spiritual alignment is not accidental. It is a signal, a message to the world that India is choosing to lead not through aggression, but through cultural rootedness. In a world where many nations lose their identity in pursuit of power, India is doing the opposite. She is gaining power by returning to herself. That, my friends, is the most powerful thing any nation can do. So when you see the headlines about gold, about mines, about reserves, look deep. See the grandmother gifting a tiny bangle to her newborn granddaughter, believing that gold will guard her through every season of life. See the priest laying a golden cloth before a sacred idol. See the miner whose dusty hands now carry the future of his village. See the woman who walks into a bank, not for a loan, but to deposit gold, passed down from generations, gold that now backs her country's strength. That is what this moment is made of, not just policy, not just strategy, but story, spirit, and because when a nation reclaims its gold, it reclaims its voice, and when that gold is pulled not just from the ground, but from the heart of a civilization,